Eleanor Whitmore did not cry at her father's grave. She stood straight, hat in both hands, and made herself a promise over that fresh mound of dirt she would not lose this ranch. Not to the bank, not to Nathaniel Cross, not to any law written by men who believed a woman alone was a woman already defeated. Then she rode home, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at a document that told her she had 30 days to produce a husband's signature or lose everything her family had bled to build. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Horace Bellamy rode up to Eagle Creek Ranch. Eleanor Whitmore was already on her knees in the dirt beside the water pump, her hands wrapped around a wrench that refused to cooperate. Her jaw set like she was prepared to fight the pump and win through sheer stubbornness alone. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. She heard the second horse right after. 2 men. The kind of arrival that meant paperwork. Ella set the wrench down slow, wiped her hands on her work trousers, and stood up. She already knew who it was. Horace Bellamy was the only man in Cutter's Creek who wore a linen suit in the middle of a Colorado summer, and he only ever came out this far when he had something to take. He dismounted with that practiced smile of his, the one he probably practiced in a mirror every morning before breakfast. His associate stayed on horseback holding a leather satchel across his lap like it contained something precious. It contained her destruction. She already knew that, too. "Miss Whitmore." Bellamy tipped his hat. "Lovely morning." "Mr. Bellamy." She didn't return the pleasantry. "You're riding out here before 8 o'clock in the morning. That's not a social call." He had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable. "No, ma'am. I'm afraid it isn't." He took the satchel from his associate and walked toward her, and Ella stood her ground on the porch steps and did not move back a single inch, even though everything inside her wanted to put a door between herself and whatever he was carrying. He laid the papers on the porch railing between them. She looked at them. She didn't pick them up. "Your father borrowed against this property twice," Bellamy said, keeping his voice the careful, practiced neutral of a man who had delivered bad news often enough that he'd stopped feeling it. "The first loan 3 years ago for the well drilling. The second 18 months ago after the drought took your cattle count down to nothing, combined with the interest accrued. I know what's owed." Her voice came out flat, controlled, the way she'd trained it to be since the moment the doctor had come out of her father's room 6 weeks ago and shaken his head. "I've known the number for a long time." "Then you understand our position." "I understand your position just fine." She picked up the top document and read every word of it, even though her eyes were burning and her hands wanted to shake. 30 days, 30 days, he confirmed. If the balance is not addressed, or if a satisfactory arrangement cannot be reached with the bank. "And what arrangement would satisfy the bank, Mr. Bellamy?" He cleared his throat. "There is a provision, Miss Whitmore. Under territorial law, a property held jointly by a married couple is treated differently than one held by a single woman. The bank would be willing to renegotiate the terms of the loan, extend the period, reduce the monthly obligation, if the property were to pass into the hands of a husband." The word came out like a stone hitting water, flat, no splash. "It is the law as it stands," he said. "The law as it stands," she repeated quietly, "was written by men who believe women are furniture." Bellamy had no answer for that. He picked up his hat, settled it back on his head, and turned toward his horse. 30 days, Miss Whitmore. I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry for your situation. But the bank has obligations of its own." She watched him ride away down the long dirt road that cut through her property. Her father's property. Her grandfather's property. 40 years of Whitmore blood and sweat pressed into this earth. And she did not move until the dust settled back down. Then she went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the papers. The number stared back at her. $4,216. She had 43. Ella spent the rest of the morning doing what she always did when things were impossible. She worked. She mucked stalls. She patched the section of fence along the north pasture that had been leaning for 3 weeks. She hauled water. She counted her remaining horses, 14 down from 42 before the drought, and she spoke to each one of them by name, the way her father always had, because her father believed horses understood more than people gave them credit for. "We're not leaving," she told a gray mare named Sunday. "I don't care what Horace Bellamy's papers say." Sunday pressed her nose against Ella's shoulder. "I just need a plan." She stroked the horse's jaw. "I've always been good at plans." The problem was that for the first time in her 27 years, she could not see one. The territorial law was real. She'd looked it up herself 2 weeks ago when she first started suspecting what was coming. A single woman could own property that part was settled, but a bank could refuse to renegotiate a loan with a single woman if they judged her an insufficient financial risk. And they always judged a woman alone to be an insufficient risk. Always. Every time. Because the law gave them that right. She needed a husband's signature on a renegotiated loan document. And she didn't have a husband. She didn't even have a prospect. The men in Cutter's Creek had known her since she was a child, and most of them either feared her sharpness or resented it, or they'd spent the last 6 weeks circling like they were waiting for her to break so they could swoop in and offer to take the problem off her hands in exchange for the property itself. Nathaniel Cross had already come calling twice, once with a contract, once with flowers. She'd turned him away both times without letting him pass the gate. He'd smiled both times. That was the part that frightened her. It was past noon when she heard a horse coming up the road. One horse this time. No associate. No leather satchel. She was on the porch when the rider came into view, and her first thought was that she didn't recognize him. Her second thought was that he was the largest man she'd seen in some time, broad across the shoulders, sitting the saddle like he'd been born in it on a black horse that moved with a quiet, unhurried certainty that matched its rider. He was somewhere past 35, maybe closer to 40. Hard to tell with men who'd spent their lives outside. Dark hair grown past his collar. Beard thick enough to be deliberate. Hands that were big and rough, and held the reins loosely, the hands of a man who had worked most things that could be worked. He stopped at the gate and did not come through it. "Afternoon, ma'am." His voice was deep and unhurried. Colorado mountains if she had to place it. The accent was short and practical. "Name's Cole Bennett. Looking for the Whitmore Ranch." "You found it," she said. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore." He took his hat off, held it against his chest. "I heard in town you might be needing hands. I do ranch work. Fence repair, horse handling, structure work. Anything needs doing in summer before winter sets in." She studied him. "Who told you I was hiring?" "Pete Garland at the feed store. Said you'd lost most of your help over the last couple months." That was true. After her father died, 2 of her 3 permanent hands had quietly found other work. They hadn't said it outright, but she understood. A ranch run by a woman alone in a rough stretch of country didn't look like stable employment. She didn't blame them. She also didn't forget it. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Bennett," she said. "I'm not in a position to offer standard wages right now. The ranch is in a difficult season." He didn't flinch. "Understand that, ma'am. I've worked for room and board before. If the work is there, that'll do for the time being." She looked at him for a moment longer. There was something about him that was different from the men who'd come through wanting something from her. He wasn't looking at the ranch house like he was calculating its value. He wasn't looking at her like she was a problem to be solved or a prize to be collected. He was just looking at her the way a man looks at another person, straight on waiting. "Come through the gate," she said. "I'll show you what needs doing." Dead. She took him around the property for the next 2 hours. Let him see the work, the real work, not the polished version she might have shown someone she was trying to impress. The fence line that needed 3 sections replaced before it fell over entirely. The barn roof with 2 soft spots that wouldn't survive a serious snow load. The water trough that leaked from a crack at the base. The hay storage situation that was going to require serious thought before September. Cole Bennett walked through all of it without a word that wasn't necessary. He crouched down at the water trough and ran his hand along the crack. He tested the fence posts with both hands, not gently, but the way you test something you actually intend to fix. He looked up at the barn roof and said nothing for a long moment. 2 weeks, he said finally. Maybe less if the wood is what I think it is. For the roof. For all of it. He looked at her. I've worked worse. This ranch is in bad shape, she said flatly. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I want you to know what you're agreeing to before you say yes to anything. I can see what the ranch is, ma'am. He put his hat back on. Question is, what it could be. That stopped her. Not because it was poetic, it wasn't particularly, but because it was the first thing anyone had said to her in 6 weeks that sounded like looking forward instead of looking at the wreckage. She made a decision. Not the one she'd been turning over in her mind all morning, that one wasn't ready yet. But the smaller decision. All right, she said. Room and board to start. If things improve, we talk about wages. He nodded once. Fair enough. Cunt. He worked from first light the next morning. She watched him from the kitchen window while she drank her coffee, which was not something she'd ever admit to anyone. He started on the fence line before the sun was fully up. Not frantically, not trying to impress anyone, just working the way experienced men work steadily and without wasted motion. By the time she brought him water at mid-morning, he'd replaced 2 full sections and was halfway through a third. He thanked her for the water with a nod and went back to work. That evening he was still at the barn when she finished her own work inside. She brought supper out because the house felt strange eating alone, and she'd gotten tired of fighting that feeling. He washed his hands at the pump, sat on the bench outside the barn door, and ate without ceremony. You've done this a long time, she said. It wasn't exactly a question. Since I was about 15, he said. Grew up in the mountains, worked ranches across 3 territories. You don't have your own place? He looked at his plate. No, ma'am. Ever wanted one? A pause. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Used to, he said. Things change. She didn't push. She'd learned from her father that men who'd been through something real didn't appreciate being pried at, and she had her own things she didn't want to discuss at supper. Maye. On the 3rd day, Nathaniel Cross arrived. He rode in with 2 of his men flanking him on a fine horse that cost more than her remaining cattle combined, and he was dressed like a man who wanted everyone around him to know how much everything cost. He was 40-something, and handsome in a way that had probably served him well his entire life, with a smile that was accustomed to landing where it aimed. It aimed at her and didn't land. Miss Whitmore, he dismounted without being invited. I heard about your visit from the bank. I want you to know I came as a friend. I have friends, Ella said from the porch. I know what they look like. Cross smiled. He was good at smiling through things that should have made him stop. I've made you 2 fair offers for this property. I'll make you a 3rd, and this one is more generous than either of the first 2. I am trying to help you avoid losing everything. You're trying to acquire what you've wanted for years, she said. The generosity is incidental. His smile tightened just slightly at the edges. The bank will not extend your loan. You are a single woman with an insufficient property record. The bank hasn't made that determination yet. It will. Then I'll deal with it when it does. She heard movement behind her from the direction of the barn, and she didn't have to look to know that Cole Bennett had come forward. She could feel it, a shift in the quality of the air on the porch, the way Cross's eyes moved slightly to a point past her shoulder. Everything all right, ma'am? Cole's voice from just behind her. Not aggressive, just there. Cross looked at him for a moment, then looked back at her. Something recalculated behind his eyes. You hired help. I hired a ranch hand, she said. As is my right. Cross tilted his head. Right. He put his hat back on. The offer stands, Miss Whitmore. When you're ready to be practical, you know where to find me. He rode off. Cole came up to stand beside her at the porch railing, and they both watched him go. That man wants your land, Cole said. He's wanted it for 4 years. Cole was quiet for a moment. He's going to keep coming. I know. She turned and went inside and spent the rest of the afternoon staring at the bank papers and doing arithmetic that refused to work out. She asked him on the 5th day. She'd thought about it for 5 nights, going around and around it, hating it, rejecting it, coming back to it because she was a practical woman, and when something kept coming back, that meant it was the answer, even if the answer was terrible. She found him replacing boards on the barn floor mid-morning, and she stood in the doorway and said his name. He looked up. "I have something to ask you," she said. "And I need you to let me finish saying it before you say anything. Can you do that?" He set the board down, stood up slowly, and turned to face her. "I'll listen," he said. She'd rehearsed this 6 different ways over 5 nights. She'd tried to find a way to ease into it, to soften it, to make it sound like anything other than what it was. She gave up on all of that and just said it. "The bank will not renegotiate my loan unless this property is held by a married couple." She kept her voice level. "Territorial law allows them to refuse a single woman regardless of her actual ability to pay. I have 30 days 25 now before they move to take the ranch. And the only legal path I have is a husband's signature on a renegotiated loan document." Cole said nothing. His face said nothing. He was the most unreadable man she'd ever been in a room with. "I'm not asking you to pretend," she said. "I'm not asking for something that isn't real. I'm asking if you would be willing to enter a legal marriage with me for the purpose of securing this ranch against the bank. In exchange, you would have permanent employment here with wages, a home, a stake in the property that we would put in writing." She stopped. "I know what I'm asking. I know how it sounds. I know you rode in here looking for work and this is something else entirely. And I will understand if your answer is no." The barn was very quiet. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Not through her, not past her. At her. Like he was reading something he hadn't expected to find. "You thought about this for a while," he said. 5 days. "What happens if the bank situation gets sorted and you want to move on? What happens to the arrangement then?" "I put that in writing too," she said. "If we agree on terms, everything is documented. Either party can dissolve the arrangement with 60 days' notice once the loan is secured and in good standing. You would retain your stake in the labor improvements you contributed." He looked down at the board in his hands, set it against the wall. "There's something you should know," he said. He wasn't looking at her. "I don't do this lightly. I don't give my word lightly. If I say yes to this, I mean yes. Not half a yes, not yes, until something more convenient comes along. Yes." "I wouldn't ask for less than that," she said. "I'm also going to tell you something true." He turned back to face her. "I've been working other people's land for 20 years. I know how to work. I know how to protect. I know how to stay through hard seasons. What I don't know—" He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. Something old. "I don't know how to stay when things are good. That's the part I'm warning you about." Ella looked at him. At the careful, deliberate honesty on his face. At the way he'd said that last part, like it cost him something to say it. "That's fair warning," she said. "So you're not scared off." "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I am asking a stranger to become my husband in order to save a ranch that is barely standing. I am well past scared off." Something shifted in his face. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but it was something close. "All right," he said. "All right." "Yes," he said. "I'll do it." They were married on a Tuesday. In the office of Judge Clarence Holt, who was 72 years old and had performed courthouse marriages for 30 years and asked no questions he didn't legally need to ask. The only witness was Pete Garland from the feed store, who had introduced Cole to her situation in the first place, and who cried slightly through the whole thing, which neither of them commented on. Ella wore the dress she'd worn to her father's funeral because it was the only proper dress she owned that was clean. She thought about that while she stood in front of the judge and said the necessary words that she was wearing her mourning dress to her wedding. That seemed like something that should have made her sad. Mostly it just seemed like information. Cole wore his least worn shirt. He stood straight. He said the words in the same voice he said everything, level, deliberate, like he meant them, even though they both knew the context. When the judge said the marriage was legal and binding, Ella felt something settle inside her that she hadn't expected. Not joy, not romance, just something quieter than that, like a door closing against a storm. After they walked back to her to their wagon in silence. "We should go to the bank today," Ella said, "before Bellamy leaves for the evening." "Agreed." Cole climbed up to the seat. She climbed up the other side. He picked up the reins. He looked at her briefly before he clicked the horse forward. "We'll handle it," he said. She looked straight ahead. "Yes," she said. "We will." Horace Bellamy did not look entirely pleased when they walked into his office at 4:15 that afternoon, Cole standing a half step to Ella's left with his hat in his hand, and the marriage certificate in hers. She placed the certificate on his desk. Bellamy looked at it, then at Cole, then at her. "This is—" He stopped, picked up the certificate, read it. "This is same day." "Is there a waiting period I'm unaware of?" Ella said. Bellamy set the certificate down with the careful movements of a man choosing his next words. "No waiting period." He cleared his throat. "I'll need to bring this to the review board, of course. The loan renegotiation will take—" "How long?" Cole spoke for the first time since they'd walked in. Bellamy looked at him. Cole did not shift his stance, did not look away. "A week," Bellamy said. "Perhaps 10 days. "Then you have 10 days, Cole said. "After that, we'd like clear terms in writing." Bellamy nodded with the expression of a man who had expected this to go differently. "Of course, Mr. Bennett, is it?" "That's right." They walked out of the bank into the late afternoon heat, and Ella stood on the boardwalk outside for a moment, looking down the main street of Cutter's Creek, at the buildings and the people and the ordinary machinery of a day going on around her. "That was something to watch," she said quietly. "What was—" "You in there." She started toward the wagon. "He expected you to fold." "Men like that always do," Cole said, walking alongside her. "They think size is about how much space you take up." She looked at him sidelong. "What do you think it's about?" He thought about it for a moment. Opened the wagon door from her side. "Whether you're still standing when the other person runs out of arguments," he said. She looked at him for a beat longer than she intended. Then she climbed up. They drove home through the long golden stretch of a Colorado summer evening, and the mountains were the color of something almost painfully beautiful ahead of them. And neither of them spoke much. But it wasn't the silence of two people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who had said enough for one day. Cole unhitched the horse when they got back. Ella started supper. She made enough for two without thinking about it, which was different from the last 6 weeks of making barely enough for one. When he came in to wash up, she was already at the stove. "Ground rules," she said without turning around. "I figured there'd be some. This is a working arrangement. We treat each other with respect. We don't lie to each other about the state of the ranch or the state of anything else. If there's a problem, we say so." She turned to look at him. "You don't give orders in this house. I don't pretend I have no opinion about how the work gets done outside. We make decisions together." He dried his hands on the towel by the sink. "That's reasonable." "I'm not looking for a protector," she said. "I'm looking for a partner." "Understood." He hung the towel, met her eyes. "Same for me then. I don't want someone who needs me to be something I'm not, and I won't pretend to be easier to live with than I am." "Are you difficult to live with?" "I'm quiet," he said. "I go outside when things get heavy. I don't talk when I should sometimes." "I talk too much when I'm anxious," she said. "I overplan. I make lists about making lists." Something that was close to a smile moved across his face. "We'll figure it out," he said. She turned back to the stove. "Yes," she said. "We will." Outside, the Colorado summer evening turned gold and then amber, and then the deep blue of a mountain dusk, and Eagle Creek Ranch sat in all that fading light, exactly as it always had, stubborn, imperfect, and still standing. The first week of their marriage, Ella made a rule for herself. She would not watch him work from the kitchen window. She broke it every single morning. She told herself it was practical. She needed to know what progress was being made on the fence line, on the barn roof, on the water trough. She told herself it was the same kind of monitoring she'd done with every hand her father had ever hired. She was the owner of this ranch, and it was her right and responsibility to know what was happening on her own property. She told herself all of that while she stood at the window with her coffee going cold in her hands, watching Cole Bennett work in the early morning light, with that quiet, unhurried certainty of his. And she was honest enough with herself to know that none of the things she was telling herself were entirely true. The truth was simpler and considerably more unsettling. She had lived alone in this house for 6 weeks since her father died, and before that, she had lived here with a man who was sick for 8 months and then gone, and the house had become something she moved through rather than lived in. A place of lists and ledgers and tasks, and the specific loneliness of someone who was too busy to stop and feel it directly. Cole Bennett's presence on this ranch changed the quality of the air. She wasn't ready to examine what that meant. So she watched him from the window and then went back to her ledgers and told herself it was management. He did not make it easy to ignore him. Not because he was loud, he was the opposite of loud. He was the kind of quiet that had weight to it, the kind you noticed. He ate what she made without complaint and said thank you every time, which her father had done too, and which she hadn't realized she'd missed until it came back. He fixed things without being asked. Not just the things on the list they'd made together, but the small things she hadn't gotten to a hinge on the chicken coop gate that had been stiff for months, a loose board on the porch steps that she'd learned to step over so automatically she'd forgotten it was broken. On the 9th morning, she nearly tripped over the porch step out of habit and caught herself on the railing and looked down to find that the board had been replaced and reinforced while she was sleeping. She stood there for a moment. Then she went back inside and put that feeling in the same place she was putting all the other feelings she wasn't ready for yet. Young. The bank's letter arrived on the 11th day. It came by courier, a boy from town who handed it over at the gate and rode off before she could ask him anything. Ella carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the envelope for exactly 30 seconds before she opened it. She read it twice. Then she set it down and read it a third time, because the first 2 times she'd been waiting for the part where they said no. It wasn't there. The loan renegotiation had been approved by the review board. The new terms were extended over 7 years at a reduced monthly payment. The first payment was not due for 90 days. Bellamy's signature was at the bottom, and underneath it, a second signature she didn't recognize, from someone with the title of Regional Lending Director. Ella sat with the letter in her hands and felt something crack open in her chest that she had been holding closed for months. She didn't cry. She had not cried since her father's funeral, and she was not going to start now over a bank document. But her hands shook slightly, and she pressed them flat on the table and breathed until they stopped. She heard Cole's boots on the porch. He came in, saw her face, and stopped inside the door. What happened? She turned the letter around on the table so he could read it. He crossed to the table and read it. She watched his face while he did. He was quiet for a long moment after he finished. 7 years, he said. 7 years, she said. We can do this in 5 if the herd rebuilds the way I think it can. Cole looked at her. Something was moving behind his eyes that she couldn't name. You've already run the numbers. Last night. She pulled the ledger across the table. I couldn't sleep. I went through every scenario I could think of. Cattle prices, hay costs, what we'd need to break even, what we'd need to actually get ahead. It's possible. It's tight, but it's possible. He sat down across from her. Show me. That was the first time they sat at the kitchen table together over the ledger. Not because she needed to explain herself, but because he asked, and she showed him, and he followed every number with the focused attention of someone who actually wanted to understand. He asked good questions. Not the kind that challenged her math, but the kind that were genuinely curious. What had the herd looked like before the drought? What was the best price she'd gotten for cattle in a good year? What did she know about the eastern buyers her father had dealt with? An hour passed before either of them noticed. You're good at this, Cole said at some point. Ella looked up. At what? Numbers. Planning. He sat back. The way you think about a problem. Most people look at a hole and see a hole. You look at it and see 3 ways to fill it. She didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever said it quite like that before. Her father had known it, had relied on it for years, but he'd never named it. My father used to say I was too practical for my own good, she said. Cole shook his head slow. That's not a flaw. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the ledger and turned a page. We need to talk about the herd situation, she said. He let her change the subject. She noticed that he let her, and she appreciated it more than she intended to. Kung. The news traveled through Cutter's Creek the way news always traveled through small towns, faster than it had any right to, and with additions that nobody had authorized. By the end of that first week after the bank letter, Ella heard 3 different versions of her own marriage. In the first, she had trapped a drifter into marrying her to steal his money, which she found insulting on multiple levels. In the second, Cole was a fugitive hiding under an assumed name, which she dismissed immediately because fugitives didn't ask for room and board. In the third and most creative version, the 2 of them had been secretly in love for years, and the bank crisis had simply forced them to make it official. She told Cole about the third version over supper, and he stared at her for a long moment. We met 11 days ago, he said. I know that. People in this town have a lot of time. Small towns always do. She set down her fork. People are going to talk. I want you to be prepared for that. They're going to look at us when we come into town together. They're going to speculate. Some of them are going to be outright rude about it. I've been talked about before. Not as my husband. He looked at her directly. Does that bother you? She considered the honest answer. It bothers me that they'll assume I couldn't manage on my own, that the marriage is the only reason the ranch is still standing. She paused. The bank situation would have been there with or without you. The arrangement solved a legal problem, the ranch itself that was already mine to hold or lose. Cole nodded. You want credit for your own work. I want people to see the work at all. She picked up her fork again. They mostly don't. They'll see a woman who finally got herself a husband and assume that's the whole story. What do you want to do about it? Nothing, she said. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of it, and that I don't intend to pretend this ranch is running well because of a man. It's running because of 40 years of Whitmore work and a plan and a legal arrangement that we both entered with clear eyes. Cole was quiet for a moment. You know, he said most people in your situation would have been grateful just to solve the immediate problem. They wouldn't be thinking 3 moves ahead already. My father taught me that the immediate problem is never really the problem, she said. The problem is always what comes next. Cole set down his own fork and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your father sounds like he was something, he said. He was, she said, and this time, something did crack through her voice just slightly. Just a hairline fracture that she sealed back up before it could widen. Cole picked up his fork and went back to eating and did not make her feel seen in the way that would have embarrassed her. She appreciated that too. It was 3 weeks into the marriage when she found out something about Cole Bennett that she hadn't expected. She found it by accident, which was probably the only way she would have found it at all. She'd gone to the barn earlier than usual before sunrise because she couldn't sleep, and there was a mare who'd been favoring her left foreleg, and Ella wanted to check it before the heat of the day set in. She came around the corner of the barn quietly, not trying to be quiet, just not thinking about her footsteps, and she heard Cole's voice inside. She stopped. He was talking. Not to her, to the horses. She stood outside this barn door and listened, and what she heard was a man who talked to horses the way most people talk to close friends. Not baby talk, not commands, but actual conversation. Low and unhurried. Telling a gray gelding named Archer about the fence work he'd done the previous day. What he thought about the way the ground was drying out, what he'd noticed about the eastern pasture grass that he thought was worth looking into. The gelding made a soft sound. Cole laughed quietly. Yeah, he said. I know, it's a lot. Ella stood very still. She knew from the way Cole moved around the horses that he was good with them, She knew they settled around him the way animals settle around people who understand them. She hadn't known until that moment that there was something underneath, that something that used the horses the way she used her ledgers. As a place to put things she couldn't say anywhere else. She backed up quietly and went around to the water pump to make noise before she came back in so he'd hear her coming. By the time she walked into the barn, he was at the workbench with his back to her, looking at something she couldn't see perfectly composed. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He half turned. "Mare's leg looks better. I checked it last night." "Good," she said. "Thank you." She went about her work, and he went about his, and neither of them mentioned the other's early morning, and she spent the rest of that day thinking about a man who laughed quietly at a horse's response, and said, "I know it's a lot," and who clearly had more things that were a lot than he ever showed anyone directly. Nathaniel Cross's second visit was not like the first. The first time he'd come with an offer. The second time he came with information which was considerably more dangerous. He arrived on a Tuesday alone this time, which should have made him seem less threatening. It made him seem more so. He rode up to the gate and called out her name, and when she came onto the porch, he took his hat off and held it against his chest, in a gesture that looked polite and felt like the opposite. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mrs. Bennet, I suppose, now." "Mr. Cross," she said, "if you're here to make another offer on the property, I'll save us both time and say no before you get to it." "I'm not here about an offer." He turned his hat in his hands. "I'm here because I think there's something you should know, as a neighbor, as someone who's known your family for years." She folded her arms. "Say what you came to say." Cross reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He held it up, but didn't come closer, didn't try to hand it to her. "This is a survey filed in the county records office dated 1871. It marks the boundary between your property and mine." He paused. "There is some question, according to the men I've had look at it, about whether the eastern line of Eagle Creek Ranch runs where your father always believed it did." Ella felt cold, despite the summer heat. "That survey was done when my father bought this land." "I know. And your father was a good man who believed what he was told." Cross tucked the document back into his coat. "I'm having my own survey done. I expect it will take about 2 weeks. I wanted you to know in advance out of respect for your father's memory." "Out of respect," she said. "I have no interest in taking what's rightfully yours," Cross said. "But if the survey shows what I believe it shows, there is a strip of land along your eastern pasture, roughly 40 acres, that may legally be mine." He settled his hat back on. "I thought you deserved to know." He rode away. Ella stood on the porch after he was gone, and did not move for a long time. 40 acres of eastern pasture. The best grazing land on the entire property. The section she'd had her highest hopes for when she'd been running numbers with Cole at the kitchen table, projecting what the herd could grow to if the summer held. If that land wasn't hers, the numbers changed. All of them. She heard Cole come around the corner of the barn. He'd been working on the roof section, and had probably heard the exchange. The distance wasn't that great. He came and stood at the foot of the porch steps and looked at her. "How much of that did you hear?" she said. "Enough," he said. "Eastern pasture. 40 acres." She sat down on the porch step. "If he's right about the survey." "I don't know if he's right about the survey. My father never said anything about a boundary dispute. Your father might not have known." Cole came up and sat on the step beside her. Not close, but not far. "Men like Cross don't bring something like that up unless they've been sitting on it. He's been sitting on this." "I know." "Which means he pulled it out now because the bank situation didn't work the way he expected." She looked at him. That was exactly what she'd been thinking, and she hadn't said it yet. "He expected the bank to take the ranch," she said slowly. "Or he expected me to accept one of his offers out of desperation. The marriage us solving the loan issue that wasn't in his plan." "So now he's moving to plan 2, Cole said. "Which is to chip away at the land itself instead of the debt." Ella pressed her hands together. Thought. My father kept all his original property documents in the house. The deed, the original survey correspondence with the land office. She stood up. I need to find them. What are you looking for? Anything that contradicts what Cross just told me. She was already moving toward the door. Or anything that confirms it, because I'd rather know the truth and deal with it than wait for his survey and be surprised. Cole stood. I can ride to the county records office tomorrow, pull the filed documents myself and compare them against whatever you find in the house. She stopped with her hand on the door, turned back. You'd do that. We're partners, he said, simply, like it wasn't something that needed more weight than that. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded and went inside. She found her father's documents in the cedar chest in the back bedroom, the room that had been his office for 30 years that still smelled like pipe tobacco and wood polish, and something else she couldn't name that was just him. She hadn't been in this room much since he died. She'd come in once to retrieve the deed for the bank meeting and then closed the door behind her and not come back. She opened the cedar chest and went through it with methodical hands and a heart that wanted to ache and was not being allowed to right now. The original deed was there, dated 1846, her grandfather's name on it. The first survey map, hand-drawn, the lines uncertain the way hand-drawn things were in that era. Correspondence with the Territorial Land Office, a stack of it going back decades. Her father's handwriting in the margins of some documents, neat and precise, the same handwriting that filled the old ledgers. She took everything to the kitchen table. She spread the survey map out and looked at it for a long time, cross-referencing it against the deed, against the correspondence, against her own memory of what her father had told her about the property lines over the years. Cole came in after dark, washed his hands, and came to the table without being asked. She made room for him to see. They went through it together. It took 2 hours. By the end, Ella had a headache and 3 pages of notes, and something that might have been either a solution or a deeper complication, she wasn't sure yet. Here, she said, pointing to a notation in the 1871 correspondence. This letter from the land office references a resurvey that was conducted at the request of the property owner to the east of us. That would have been Cross's father. Cole leaned over the table and read the notation. It was done, but the results were never formally filed. Not in these documents. Ella sat back. Which means either my father never received a copy, or he received it, and it's not in this chest, or the resurvey found nothing contradictory, and was simply never registered because there was no dispute at the time. Or, Cole said carefully, Cross's father buried the results of that survey because they didn't support the boundary he wanted. The room was very quiet. That's a serious accusation, Ella said. I know. Do you have anything to base it on? Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he sat back. Nathaniel Cross came here after you married me, not before. He had this survey situation available to him the entire time your father was alive, the entire time the bank was threatening you, and he did not use it until you removed the threat of losing the ranch the way he expected. He looked at her. That tells me he wants this property badly enough to have been strategic about it. A man that strategic doesn't stumble onto old surveys. He keeps them ready. Ella looked at her notes, then at the original survey map, then at the correspondence. If you're right, she said, then somewhere in the county records there's a filed survey that either supports our boundary or contradicts it. Either way, we need to see it. I'll go tomorrow, Cole said. First light. I'm coming with you. He looked at her. All right. I need you to understand something. She folded the correspondence carefully, precisely the way her father always had. If Cross is right about the boundary and the eastern pasture isn't ours, it changes everything. The numbers I ran, the projections for rebuilding the herd, they depend on that grazing land. I know. Which means if we lose it, we need a completely different plan. Then we'll make one, Cole said. But let's find out what's true before we plan for losses. She looked at him. At the complete, unadorned steadiness of him. It was such a specific kind of steadiness. Not the kind that came from not caring, but the kind that came from having been through enough that you knew panic was a waste of energy you were going to need for the actual problem. "You're not worried," she said. "I didn't say that." He met her eyes. "I'm worried. I'm also not going to be useful to either one of us if I spend tonight worrying instead of thinking." She held his gaze for a moment. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Decide to just think instead of feel." He was quiet for a beat. "I had a lot of practice," he said, and the way he said it closed a door gently without making it feel like a rejection, just a door. She understood doors. She had plenty of her own. "Get some sleep," she said. "I'll be ready at first light." He nodded and pushed back from the table. He was at the doorway to the hall when she spoke again. "Cole." He turned. "Thank you." She said it simply, without making it larger than it was. "For staying the way you've been staying. I know this isn't what you came here for." He stood in the doorway for a moment. The lamplight caught the side of his face. "Maybe not," he said. "But it's what I'm here for now." He paused. "Get some sleep too, Ella." He hadn't called her Ella before. Always ma'am or Miss Whitmore. She noticed it and then made herself stop noticing it and went back to her notes. The ride to the county records office in Hartwell took most of the morning. They didn't talk much on the way, which Ella was grateful for. She was running numbers in her head, running scenarios, running the conversation with Cross over and over, and listening for the thing underneath his words that she hadn't quite caught in the moment. He had said, "I have no interest in taking what's rightfully yours." He had not said he had no interest in taking what wasn't rightfully hers. The distinction seemed increasingly important. The county records office was a single room in the back of the Hartwell courthouse, maintained by a small, precise man named Arthur Fenwick, who wore spectacles and regarded people who came to look at old surveys with the suspicion of a man protecting something valuable. Ella stated what she was looking for. Fenwick went to the back room and returned with 3 bound ledgers and a flat file that he carried with both hands. Cole stood at the counter beside her while she looked through the documents. She was aware of him there, not in a way that distracted her, but in the way that something solid and reliable at your elbow is just there, part of the landscape of the situation. She found it in the second ledger. A resurvey conducted in 1872. Filed by a surveyor named Amos Llewellyn, commissioned by the county office to resolve a boundary question between the Cross property and the Whitmore property to the west. She went very still. She read the survey documentation. Then she read it again. Then she turned to Cole very slowly and said his name quietly. He leaned over and read the relevant section. The survey conducted in 1872 had found the boundary line to be exactly where the original 1846 deed placed it. The eastern pasture of Eagle Creek Ranch, all 40 acres, was Whitmore land. Had always been Whitmore land. The resurvey had confirmed it clearly enough that Amos Llewellyn had written in his notes that there was no legitimate basis for any boundary dispute on the eastern line. The survey had been filed with the county. Properly. Completely. Which meant Nathaniel Cross had known about it. Which meant Nathaniel Cross had told her about a boundary dispute that this county's own filed records had resolved 50 years ago. Cole straightened up. He said nothing. Ella looked at Arthur Fenwick. "I need a certified copy of this," she said. Her voice was very calm. "The survey and the surveyor's notes." Fenwick looked at her over his spectacles. At Cole. Back at her. "That'll take about an hour." "We'll wait," Ella said. They sat on the bench outside the records room side by side, and Ella looked at her hands and thought about Nathaniel Cross riding up to her gate and telling her there was a question about the eastern line out of respect for your father's memory. Out of respect. "He lied," she said quietly. Cole sat with his elbows on his knees and looked straight ahead. "Yes. He came to my property and looked me in the eye and told me there was a legitimate survey question about land that the county itself confirmed as mine 50 years ago." "Yes." "Why?" She turned to look at him. He had to have known I'd check. He had to know the filed survey exists. Cole was quiet for a moment. I think, he said carefully, that he was counting on you not checking, or not knowing where to look, or being scared enough by the suggestion that you'd start thinking about concessions you might offer him to make the problem go away. Ella sat with that. He underestimated you, Cole said. He underestimated what a woman who's been doing her own books for 6 years knows about documentation, she said. Cole looked at her sideways, and this time what was on his face was unmistakable. It was respect, plain and direct, the kind that didn't come with any conditions attached. She looked away before it could do anything to her. They rode home with the certified copies in a satchel across Ella's lap. About halfway back, Cole said, "He's going to find out we have these." "Yes," she said. "And when he does, he'll know his move didn't work." "Yes." "Which means he'll make another one." She'd been thinking about this the entire ride. He has money, and he has lawyers, and he has 30 years of political relationships in this county. We have documentation and the truth. She paused. In a fair situation, that would be enough. And if it's not a fair situation, she turned the satchel over in her hands. Then we make sure enough people know the truth that it becomes unfair for him to ignore it. She looked at Cole. The community here, the small ranchers, the farmers on the North Side Cross, has been buying out their neighbors for years, pushing down cattle prices, controlling access to the eastern water routes. She watched him. They don't like him. They're afraid of him, but they don't like him. Cole was quiet following this. If this comes to a public dispute, Ella said, he doesn't want witnesses. He wants this handled quietly, the way he's handled everything else. Quietly means I'm isolated, frightened, unsupported. She straightened in the saddle. So we need to make sure that's not what we are. Cole rode beside her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Who do you trust in this county?" "Pete Garland, Doc Hensley, Margaret Sutter, who runs the dry goods, maybe 4 or 5 of the smaller ranchers on the north side." She looked at him. "Enough to start." Cole nodded slowly. Something was settling into his expression that she recognized as the same quality she'd seen in the barn after Cross's first visit. Not aggression, not bravado. Just the quiet resolve of someone who'd decided on a direction. "All right," he said. "Then that's where we start." She looked ahead at the mountains still bright with summer in every direction. The road home stretched out in front of them, long and dry and familiar. She thought about her father's survey documents in the cedar chest, and the land office correspondence with his handwriting in the margins, and 40 years of Whitmore work pressed into the eastern pasture that a man with money had tried to take from her with a smile and a document he knew was worthless. She thought about Cole Bennett saying, "That's where we start. We, not I, not you, we." She held on to that word for the rest of the ride and didn't examine it too closely, but she held on to it. Pete Garland heard them out in the back room of the feed store, sitting on an overturned crate, with his elbows on his knees, and when Ella finished laying out what Cross had done, the false boundary claim, the county survey that contradicted it, the timing of it all. Pete was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That man has been running this county like it belongs to him for 15 years. "I know," Ella said. "People are tired of it." Pete looked at Cole. "They're scared, but they're tired." "Scared doesn't help us," Cole said. "Tired might." Pete nodded slowly. "You want me to talk to the North Side ranchers?" "I want them to know the truth," Ella said. "What Cross did to me, he can do to any of them. He probably already has in one form or another." She leaned forward. "I'm not asking anyone to fight my battle. I'm asking people to understand what kind of man they're dealing with." Pete looked at her for a long moment. He'd known her since she was 12 years old, coming in with her father to buy grain, sitting on the counter, eating hard candy and reading the labels on feed sacks. He'd cried at her wedding, not her father's funeral, though he'd been there for that too, but her wedding, the quick Tuesday courthouse affair, and she still didn't entirely know why. "All right," he said. "I'll talk to them." They left the feed store with one ally confirmed, and the certified survey copies still in the satchel, and the particular feeling that comes from having made the first real move in a game that's been playing around you without your permission. The North Side ranchers came to Eagle Creek on a Thursday evening, 5 of them sitting around the kitchen table that was not quite big enough for 6 adults and a spread of original documents. They were men her father had known. Men who remembered when the territory was smaller and quieter, and Cross's reach hadn't extended so far east, and they looked at the county survey and the certified copy and passed them around the table without much talking. Bill Marston, who had the largest operation of the group, set the documents down last. He was a heavy-set man with a white beard and the hands of someone who hadn't done enough of his own work in years, and he looked at Ella with the measuring expression of someone who was deciding how much to believe. "What exactly are you asking for?" he said. "Right now, nothing," Ella said. "I'm showing you what he did, what he tried to do." She kept her voice steady. "You each have your own property lines, your own records. I'd suggest you pull them and know what you've got. And if Cross comes after one of us the same way he came after you, then you won't be surprised," she said. "And you'll know where to find people who are willing to stand up in a public proceeding and say what kind of man he is." Marston looked at Cole. Cole met his eyes and said nothing, and after a moment, Marston looked back at Ella. "Your father was a straight man," Marston said. "I know he was. You're straight too. Always thought so." Marston pushed back from the table. "I'll think on it." Which meant yes, eventually. Ella had lived in this county long enough to know the difference between a maybe that meant no and a maybe that meant I need another week. After they left, Cole cleared the cups from the table while she put the documents back in order, and they moved around the kitchen in the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the past weeks, without either of them quite registering when it started. "Marston will come around," Cole said. "I know." She stacked the documents. "It's not Marston I'm worried about." He looked at her. "Cross hasn't responded," she said, "to any of it. He hasn't come back, hasn't sent a letter, hasn't done anything." She set the stack down. "That scares me more than the boundary claim did." Cole put the last cup away and turned to face her. "A man like that doesn't go quiet because he gave up." "No," she said. "He goes quiet because he's working on something else." She found out what he was working on 8 days later, and she found out in the worst possible way from a stranger. A man she'd never seen before rode up to the gate on a Wednesday afternoon while Cole was in the far north pasture repairing the water trough extension. She almost didn't go out to meet him, some instinct in her hesitating, but she went because she was the owner of this ranch, and she didn't hide from strangers at her own gate. He introduced himself as a representative of the Hartwell Territorial Land Commission. He had a badge and a letter of introduction, and he was very polite in the particular way of men delivering things you don't want to receive. "There's been a formal complaint filed with the commission," he said, "regarding the legal standing of the marriage recorded between yourself and a Cole Bennett on—" He checked his paperwork, the 18th of last month. Ella went still. "A complaint about the marriage. A challenge to its validity," he said. "The complaint alleges that the marriage was entered into for fraudulent purposes, specifically to manipulate the terms of a bank loan, and requests that the commission investigate the matter and potentially refer it for legal review." She looked at him. "Who filed the complaint?" He hesitated. "Who filed it?" she said again. "Mr. Nathaniel Cross," he said, "on behalf of his interests as a neighboring property owner who believes the fraudulent arrangement has affected the county's legal and financial processes." She heard Cole's horse coming around from the north. She didn't look. She kept her eyes on the commission representative and kept her voice level and said, "What does this investigation involve?" "We would need to speak with both parties separately," he said. "Review documentation. Potentially take testimony." He paused. "If the commission finds sufficient cause, it can recommend the marriage be declared invalid." If that determination is made, the bank's renegotiated loan terms would revert to the original agreement, which— I know what the original terms were, she said. Cole had come around to the gate. He had heard enough on the approach. He dismounted and stood at the gate and looked at the commission man with that particular stillness of his. "When do you need us?" Cole said. "I can be back Thursday," the man said. "I'd ask that you both be available." "We'll be here," Cole said. The commission man tipped his hat and rode off. Ella waited until he was far enough down the road that the dust had started to settle. Then she turned around and walked to the porch and sat down on the steps, and she put her face in her hands for exactly 5 seconds. Then she took her hands away and looked at the mountains. Cole came and sat beside her. "He went after the marriage," she said. "Yes, because the land claim didn't work. Because I had documentation. So now he's going after the thing that solved the bank problem." She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "If the marriage is declared invalid, the loan reverts. We can't pay the original terms. The bank takes the ranch." "The marriage isn't invalid," Cole said. She looked at him. "Cole?" We walked into a judge's office and said the words and signed the paper and went to the bank the same afternoon. Anyone looking at the timing can see exactly what it was. "It was a legal marriage," Cole said, "between 2 consenting adults. The reason 2 people get married isn't grounds for invalidating it. Not under territorial law. Cross has lawyers who will argue otherwise. Then we get a lawyer who argues the other side." She looked at him for a moment. He was looking straight ahead, jaw set, and she could see the tension in him that he didn't let into his voice, the particular tightness around his eyes that she'd learned to read over the past weeks. "You're angry," she said. "Yes." At Cross, he was quiet for a moment. At the idea that a man with money can just— He stopped, started again. He doesn't want the land, not really. He wants to win. He wants to prove he can take what he decides he deserves. He turned to look at her. "I've worked for men like that my whole life. They don't ever have enough. It's not about the eastern pasture. It wasn't about the boundary. It's about you having something he decided should be his, and him not being able to stand that a woman alone told him no." The directness of it hit her somewhere she hadn't expected. "I told him no twice," she said. "I know." Something moved through his expression. "And he can't stand it." She looked at her hands. "We need a lawyer." "There's one in Hartwell, Garrison Holt. He's the judge's nephew, been practicing territorial law for about 12 years. Cole paused. Pete Garland mentioned him. She looked at him. "You asked Pete about lawyers 2 days ago." He met her eyes. "I didn't want to worry you before I had something worth saying." She held his gaze. That settled something and unsettled something else simultaneously, in a way she didn't have language for yet. "All right," she said. "We ride to Hartwell tomorrow." Garrison Holt was not what she expected. She'd expected someone older, more formal, the kind of lawyer who spoke in long sentences, full of Latin. Instead, she got a man about her own age, maybe a few years past 30, with ink-stained fingers, and the distracted intensity of someone who was always partially thinking about something other than the conversation in front of him. His office was stacked with ledgers and reference volumes in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of her own desk. He listened to the whole situation without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and pressed his fingertips together. "Cross filed with the Land Commission," he said. "Yes. Not the county court." "Does that matter?" "It matters a great deal." Holt leaned forward. "The Land Commission has jurisdiction over property disputes. It has very limited jurisdiction over marital law. What Cross is trying to do is use a property commission to make a determination that only a civil court can actually make, specifically whether your marriage was entered into fraudulently." He looked at both of them. "The commission can investigate. It can make recommendations. It cannot invalidate a legal marriage. That requires a civil proceeding." "The Debastier," Then he'll file a civil proceeding, Cole said. He'd have to. Holt pulled a notepad toward him. And in a civil proceeding, he'd have to prove fraud. Not just argue that the timing looked suspicious. He'd have to demonstrate that the marriage itself was a deliberate misrepresentation made with intent to deceive. He looked at Ella. Which brings me to a question I need to ask you directly. Ask it. Holt looked at her, then at Cole, then back at her. Is this a genuine marriage, or isn't it? The kitchen table silence that she'd learned to live in for the past weeks stretched out between them in a different location, and it felt different here, watched formal weighted in a way that the private version of it never was. We married legally, Ella said carefully. That's not what I asked. Holt's voice wasn't unkind. I'm your lawyer. I need the truth so I can figure out what we're working with. She looked at Cole. He was looking at her. Something happened in that look that she wasn't entirely prepared for, not because it was complicated, but because it wasn't. It was very simple. The kind of simple that's more alarming than complexity. We married to solve the loan problem, Cole said to Holt without looking away from Ella. That was the original reason. He paused. It isn't the only thing it is anymore. Holt looked between them. That's what I needed to know. He wrote something on the notepad. Because what I'm going to tell the commission, and what we'll argue if this gets to a civil court, is that the reason for a marriage and the reality of one are not the same thing. People have been marrying for practical reasons for 1,000 years. The law doesn't require that you be in love to be validly wed. It requires consent capacity and legal process. You had all three. He set his pen down. Cross is banking on the commission taking his framing at face value. We're going to show them a different picture. What picture? Ella said. A functioning household, Holt said simply. A working ranch. Two people who have built something together over the past month. Testimony from people who have observed you both. He looked at Cole. The hands who work with you. The neighbors. Pete Garland. He looked at Ella. The loan itself, the fact that payments are being made, the ranch is operational. No bank officer has come forward to say they feel defrauded. He spread his hands. Cross needs to prove intent to deceive. We simply need to prove a real marriage. That's a much easier case. Ella sat back. And the commission meeting Thursday. I'll be there with you. Don't answer anything without looking at me first. Don't volunteer information they don't specifically ask for. And he looked at both of them. Don't be nervous. Nervous looks like guilt. You don't have anything to be guilty of. She nodded. Cole nodded. They rode home mostly in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the mornings. Something had been said in Holt's office that hadn't been said anywhere else yet, and it was riding along between them on the road like a third passenger. It isn't the only thing it is anymore. She did not bring it up, neither did he. But it was there, and they both knew it was there, and that knowledge had changed the quality of the air again in that specific way she'd noticed from the beginning, and refused to examine too closely. The commission meeting was held in the courthouse meeting room on Thursday morning, and it was not private the way Ella had expected it to be. She walked in to find 6 chairs arranged in a row at the front of the room. 3 commission representatives behind a long table and seated against the wall to the left. Nathaniel Cross with 2 lawyers, and a man she didn't recognize who had the particular neat, self-contained look of a professional witness. Cross saw her come in and nodded at her with a smile that turned her stomach. She nodded back once and sat down next to Cole, and on his other side, Garrison Holt, who had arrived before them and was already reading through a stack of documents with the inky-fingered focus she'd come to associate with him moving through problems. The lead commissioner was a woman named Agnes Calloway, which surprised Cross visibly and satisfied Ella in a way she didn't show. Calloway was somewhere past 50 with the expression of someone who had sat through a very large number of proceedings and was efficiently sorting the important parts from the noise. Cross's lawyers presented their case first. They were good. She had to acknowledge that they were organized and smooth, and they made the timing of the marriage sound exactly as suspicious as it was. They used words like expedient and coordinated, and designed to circumvent, and they made the whole thing sound like an elaborate scheme rather than a desperate woman making the best choice available to her. Ella sat straight and kept her face still and thought about her father standing at the winter gate in a blizzard rather than let a single cow go unaccounted for, and she let the lawyers talk. When Holt presented their side, he was quieter than Cross's lawyers, more methodical. He walked through the loan situation, the bank documentation, the legal marriage record, the certified survey copies, Pete Garland's written statement about introducing Cole to the ranch situation, the 5 Northside ranchers' statements about the Whitmore property's operational status over the past month. Then he put the 1872 survey on the table. The complaint before this commission, Holt said, was filed by a man who came to my client's property and told her there was a legitimate question about her eastern boundary. At that time, Mr. Cross had access to this document, a county-filed survey from 1872, conducted at the request of his own father's estate, which clearly establishes that boundary as Miss Whitmore's. He paused. There is no legitimate survey question. There never was. What there is a property owner with a documented interest in acquiring Eagle Creek Ranch, who has now filed a complaint with this commission using procedural mechanisms in an attempt to reverse a legal marriage, not because that marriage was fraudulent, but because its existence closed off his primary avenue for acquiring the property he wanted. The room was very quiet. Agnes Calloway looked at Cross's lawyers. Is there a response to this document? Cross's lead lawyer leaned over to confer. Cross himself was looking at the survey with an expression that was entirely too controlled. The relevance of the 1872 survey to this proceeding is unclear, the lawyer said finally. The relevance, Holt said pleasantly, is motive. You've made a case for why my client's marriage looks suspicious. I'm making a case for why this complaint looks suspicious. Calloway made a note. Then she looked at Cross directly. Mr. Cross, did you have knowledge of this survey prior to your boundary claim? Cross's lawyer began to speak. I'm asking Mr. Cross, Calloway said. Cross looked at Calloway. His smile was still there, but it was thinner now, pulled tight in a way that showed the effort behind it. I was aware of various historical surveys relating to properties in the area, he said carefully. The specific significance of this document wasn't... Thank you, Calloway said. She looked at the other 2 commissioners. A brief exchange of looks. Then she turned back to the room. This commission finds insufficient grounds to refer the matter of the Bennett-Whitmore marriage for civil review, she said. The complaint is dismissed. She looked at Cross over her reading spectacles. Mr. Cross, this commission also notes that bringing a complaint for purposes other than the resolution of a legitimate legal question is a misuse of this process. Should a similar complaint be filed in future, we will look at this record. Cross's expression didn't change. He was too practiced for that. But his lawyers were already packing their papers, and the professional witness against the wall stood up with the particular deflated quality of someone whose services weren't needed. Ella sat in her chair for a moment after Calloway adjourned the proceeding. Cole touched her arm just briefly, just enough. Let's go, he said quietly. She stood. She shook Holt's hand. She walked out of the courthouse without looking at Nathaniel Cross, but at the door she heard him speak. Not loudly. Cross never did anything loudly, but she heard him say to one of his lawyers in the quiet of a man who's used to not being overheard. Find out everything there is to know about Cole Bennett, where he came from, what he left behind. She kept walking, but her heart was beating faster than it had been before, and it wasn't from the victory. Chateau. She didn't tell Cole what she'd heard. Not that night, not the next day. She turned it over and looked at it from all sides, and tried to decide what it meant and what, if anything, to do about it. He had a past. She knew that. He'd told her as much himself. I don't know how to stay when things are good, and the specific way he'd said, I had a lot of practice, when she asked how he set aside feeling and thought instead. There was something behind Cole Bennett that he hadn't told her, and she had chosen not to press, because she had doors of her own. But Cross looking for it was different from it simply existing. What Cross found, Cross would use. She knew that now. He would use anything he found, any debt, any history, any mistake to make Cole look like someone who shouldn't be trusted with her ranch or her legal situation. And this was the part she couldn't quite stop thinking about her. She was up at 3 in the morning, 4 nights after the commission ruling, sitting at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her, and the lamp turned low when she heard Cole's door. He came out in the dark, registered her at the table, and stopped. "You haven't been sleeping," he said. It wasn't a question. "I sleep fine." "Ella." She looked up. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, and the lamplight did what lamplight always does to people at 3 in the morning, made them look more like themselves than they managed during the day. "Cross said something after the ruling," she said. "At the courthouse door. I didn't tell you." She looked at him directly. "He told his lawyer to find out everything about you. Where you came from, what you left behind." Cole stood very still. "I'm not asking," she said quickly. "Whatever is in your past, that's yours, and I am not asking." She folded her hands on the ledger. "But I need to know if he finds something, will it hurt this ranch? Will it give him something that can be used against what we've built here?" Cole walked to the table and sat down across from her. He was quiet for a long time, longer than she'd ever heard him quiet before. "My name is Cole Bennett," he said finally. "That's true, but I left Colorado Territory about 12 years ago, under circumstances I've not talked about." He looked at his hands. "I had a wife. We had a small place in the mountains, nothing like this, just a piece of land and a house we built ourselves." He stopped. "There was a winter storm. I was hunting, came back to find the house gone. Collapsed under the snow weight." He looked up at her. His face was completely still, in the way that she now recognized as the way he looked when something cost him everything he had to say it. "She didn't make it." Ella said nothing. "After that I just moved," he said. "Territory to territory, work to work. Didn't stay anywhere long enough to have anything that could be taken." He paused. "There's nothing in my past that's criminal. Nothing Cross can use that way. But the name I worked under in New Mexico in the years right after I used my mother's name, Morrison. I was Morrison for about 4 years." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because Bennett was the name on a house I couldn't go back to," he said simply. The lamp flickered slightly between them. "Cross's people might find Cole Morrison," he said. "They'll find a working hand, no trouble, moved on after 2 seasons. Nothing damaging. But they'll know I used a different name, and they'll use that to make me sound like a man who was hiding something." "Were you hiding something?" "I was hiding from grief," he said. "It's not the same thing, but a good lawyer can make it look like it is." Ella looked at him for a long moment, at his hands on the table, at the way this man who carried everything quietly had just set it all down in front of her because she'd asked. "We tell Holt," she said. Cole looked up. "We tell him everything before Cross's people find it," she said. "So he's not surprised. So we control the story instead of reacting to it." She held Cole's gaze. "Is there anything else I should know?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "That's all of it." "All right." She closed the ledger. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded. He started to push back from the table. "Cole." She said his name the way he'd said hers weeks ago, plain direct. He stopped. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "I'm sorry that happened to you." He looked at her across the table, and she saw it, the thing he kept so carefully behind the stillness. The thing she'd heard in the barn when he talked to the horses. The weight of a man who had been carrying a house on his back for 12 years. "Thank you," he said quietly. He went back to his room. Ella sat at the table for a long time after that, not looking at the ledger. Cross moved faster than she expected. 6 days after the commission ruling, Ella rode into Cutter's Creek for supplies, and came back to find that the story had already changed. She heard it from Margaret Sutter at the dry goods, who told her with the careful precision of a friend delivering bad news that someone had been talking to people around town, suggesting that Cole Bennett was not who he said he was, that he had worked under a different name in New Mexico, that the whole arrangement at Eagle Creek Ranch deserved a second look from anyone inclined to do business with the Whitmores. Ella bought her supplies, thanked Margaret, rode home. She told Cole what she'd heard before she'd even gotten her coat off. His jaw tightened. How many people did he talk to? Margaret didn't know. Enough. She set the supply bags on the counter. He's not going through the courts this time. He's going through the town. Cole stood at the window for a moment. She could see the anger in him, not the hot reactive kind, but the cold settled kind that was considerably more serious. He's trying to isolate us, Cole said. If the people in this county stop doing business with us, if the buyers won't buy, if the suppliers start being difficult. She stopped. He doesn't need the courts, he just needs us to fail quietly. Cole turned from the window. Then we don't fail quietly. Cole. No. He looked at her directly, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not stubbornness. Something clearer than either of those. That man has been treating this county like it belongs to him because no one has stood up in public and said it doesn't. He came after your land. He came after our marriage. Now he's coming after your reputation in the town your family has been part of for 40 years. Cole shook his head. I'm done being strategic about this. Strategy is what he's counting on. What are you saying? I'm saying we go back into that town, Cole said. Together. And we don't hide and we don't explain and we don't act like we've done something wrong. He looked at her steadily. Because we haven't. Ella looked at him for a long moment. Then the fence posts cut by someone in the dark, she thought. The cattle she hadn't checked yet today. She walked past Cole to the back door fast, something tightening in her chest that was instinct more than thought. The herd, she said. She was already moving. Cole was right behind her. They came around the east side of the barn, and she stopped so fast he nearly walked into her. The eastern fence line, the one Cole had rebuilt section by section over the past weeks, was cut. Not broken, not fallen. Cut. 3 sections clean, deliberate. And through those sections, in the wide open space of the eastern pasture, the cattle were gone. All 14 of them. Into the mountain foothills. In the dark, where the terrain went from open range to rough country within a quarter mile. Ella stood and looked at the open fence and the empty pasture. How long ago? Cole said. And it wasn't a question he was already reading. The ground already crouching at the fence post, looking at the cut in the wire. Night crew would have checked at dusk, Ella said. Her voice was flat. Sometime after dark. 2-3 hours ago, maybe. Cole stood. He looked at the mountain foothills. Storm coming, he said. Feel it. She felt it. The particular heaviness in the air, the way the temperature had dropped faster than it should. How long? Few hours, maybe less. He looked at her. If those cattle get up into the rock country before we find them. I know. She was already moving toward the barn. Saddle Sunday. I'll get the rope and the lanterns. Ella. His voice stopped her. This is rough country at night with a storm coming. She turned and looked at him over her shoulder. Then we'd better ride fast, she said. And they did. They rode hard into the foothills, and the darkness was the kind that sits on you like weight. Ella had ridden this terrain at night before her father had taken her out in every condition, every season, teaching her what the mountain felt like when you couldn't see it clearly, how to trust the horse's feet and your own instincts when the eyes couldn't do the work. But she had not ridden it with a storm building behind her, and 14 head of cattle scattered into rough country, and the specific cold fury of knowing that someone had done this deliberately. Cole rode to her left and slightly ahead, and she watched how he moved through the dark, easy, unhurried reading. Something she could feel, but couldn't name as well as he could. Mountain instinct. 20 years of living and working in terrain exactly like this. They'll bunch, he said without looking back. Cattle don't scatter in the dark when they're scared. They bunch up and they move downhill when they can. There's a draw about a quarter mile northeast, she said. Runs down from the rocky section. My father always found strays there after bad weather. Show me. She moved Sunday up alongside him, and they angled northeast through the scrub lanterns, low moving by feel as much as sight. They found the first 3 cattle at the mouth of the draw exactly as Cole had predicted, standing close together, confused, making the low, unhappy sounds of animals that knew something was wrong, but not what. Ella moved Sunday wide to flank them, while Cole came in from the other side, and without needing to discuss it, without a single word, they moved the 3 animals back south toward open ground. There, Cole said quietly, and she saw 6 more cattle slightly up the draw pushing against each other nervously. They worked for an hour like that, slow, careful, methodical. No shouting, no rushing, because rushing cattle in the dark on rough ground is how you lose them over a ledge or into a ravine. Cole seemed to understand this with his whole body, the way he positioned his horse, the specific quietness he used. And Ella worked in the same register, and they moved through the dark in a kind of wordless coordination that felt in the middle of it like something she'd been doing for years. 12 cattle. 13. One more, she said. Heard it, Cole said. Up high, against the rocks. He looked at her. She looked at the slope. The storm was closer now, she could hear it in the wind, feel the particular pressure drop that meant rain was maybe 40 minutes out. I'll go, Cole said. You don't know this slope. You know it. He looked at her steadily. Tell me what to watch for. She wanted to argue. She could see in his face that he knew she wanted to argue. He was looking at her with that particular expression, not dismissive, not protective in the way that dismissed her, but the look of a man who was asking a genuine question and expected a genuine answer. Sharp drop on the left side about 30 yards up, she said. Horse can't see it until you're almost on it. Stay right. There's a flat shelf halfway up where the animal is probably standing. Come in from the east side of the shelf, not the west. He nodded once, turned his horse, and went up. She held the 13 cattle at the draw mouth alone, keeping Sunday moving just enough to hold the group listening to the wind build and the sound of Cole's horse on the slope above. 2 minutes. 3. She heard the steer before she saw it. The particular sound of a large animal moving reluctantly, but moving coming down from the shelf. Then Cole appeared at the edge of the lantern light with the last steer walking ahead of him. Ears back, unhappy, alive. Something released in her chest that had been gripped tight since the moment she'd seen the cut fence. All 14, Cole said. All 14, she said. They drove the herd home through the first spits of rain. Chapter 6. The storm hit in earnest around midnight, and they were still in the barn when it did, checking each animal, making sure nothing was injured from the rough ground, moving them into the interior stalls. The rain came hard and sideways, and the barn roof held the way Cole's repairs had promised it would, and Ella was aware of that fact in a specific physical way as the sound of the storm surrounded them. Cole was checking the last steer's legs when he went quiet in a way that was different from his normal quiet. She looked at him. He was on one knee, and he was still. And when she came around to his side, she saw a cut on his right forearm, long and not deep, but bleeding in the slow, persistent way of something that had been ignored for too long. His shirt sleeve was dark with it. Cole. She crouched beside him. How long have you been bleeding? Caught a wire on the slope, he said. It's nothing. It's not nothing. She stood. Come inside. The steer is fine. She looked at him directly. Come inside. He came inside. She sat him at the kitchen table and got her father's medical kit from the shelf and did what needed doing, cleaned the cut, which was deep enough at one end to need attention. Pressed the right things together and bound it with the calm efficiency her father had always said was her most useful quality. Cole sat still through all of it, watching her hands, rather than the wound which she noticed. You've done this before, he said. Ranch work, she said. Somebody always gets cut. She tied off the binding. You should have told me. Didn't want to stop while we still had an animal out. She sat back and looked at him. He was pale under the tan slightly, in the way that hours of blood loss and cold rain and hard riding produced in people who were too stubborn to acknowledge any of it while it was happening. You could have told me when we found the 14th, she said. You were counting cattle. Cole. He met her eyes. I'm all right, Ella. I can see you're all right. She put the medical kit back together with precise movements. I'm not upset because you're seriously hurt. I'm upset because you didn't tell me. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't want you to worry. She stopped with the kit in her hands. We are partners, she said. That was the first thing I said, the very first rule. No hiding the state of things. She set the kit on the table and looked at him. That includes you. Something moved across his face. Not quite chastened. Cole was not a man who did chastened, but something that was its honest equivalent. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. He almost smiled. You always know you're right. I'm right more often than not, she said. Which is different. She stood and put the kettle on because it was midnight and cold, and they were soaked through, and something warm was the most practical solution she had to offer. We need to talk about what comes next. Cross, Cole said. The cut fence. She turned back to face him. That was deliberate. We both know it. 14 cattle loose in the foothills in the dark, with a storm coming that could have gone very badly. She said it directly because that was the only way she knew how to say hard things. If we'd lost even half that herd, the numbers I showed you don't hold anymore. The 7-year plan falls apart. Cole's jaw was tight. He sent someone onto this property. He did. That's not a lawyer. That's not a commission. That's criminal trespass and destruction of property. He looked at her. We need to report it. To who? She set 2 cups out. Sheriff Briggs in Cutter's Creek has been Cross's hunting partner for 10 years. I'm not stupid enough to think that's a coincidence. Cole was quiet for a moment. Who's above Briggs? Ella looked at him. Then something clicked into place. The territorial marshal, she said slowly. Federal jurisdiction, Cole said. Cross can't touch that. I don't have proof it was Cross's men. No, but we have the cut wire. We have 14 cattle that were in a secured pasture and ended up in the foothills. We have the timing 6 days after a commission ruling that went against him. Cole leaned forward on his good arm. That's a pattern, and federal marshals are very interested in patterns when land fraud is involved. Ella looked at him. You think this goes beyond the fence? I think a man who filed a fraudulent boundary claim and then went after the validity of our marriage and then had someone cut our fence the same week, that's not a man responding to setbacks. Cole's voice was level, but underneath it she heard the same cold anger she'd seen at the window earlier that evening. That's a man who's done this before, to other people, probably on other properties. The kettle began to make noise. She stood and poured and thought about it. Thought about the North Side ranchers who'd sat at her kitchen table passing survey documents between them. Thought about what Bill Marston had said. Cross has been at this for 15 years. 15 years. How many fences had been cut in 15 years and blamed on weather or animals? How many boundaries had been quietly questioned? How many people had sold rather than fight? We need to talk to the North Side ranchers again, she said. All of them. Ask them directly whether anything like this has ever happened to their property. They'll talk, Cole said, if they think they're not alone. They're not alone. She set a cup in front of him. That's exactly what we need them to understand. She sat across from him with her own cup, and they looked at each other across the kitchen table, in the small hours of a storm-heavy night, soaked and tired, and something else that neither of them named. And the lamp between them made the same warm circle it always did, and the rain came down outside, and Eagle Creek Ranch held. Ella wrote to the territorial marshal's office the next morning. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied the first version was too emotional, the second was too dry, the third was the right balance of documented fact and clear implication. Cole read it over without being asked and said, "This is good," which she was taking as a high standard since he didn't say things he didn't mean. She sent it by the Tuesday Post rider. Then they went to see the North Side ranchers. Not Pete Garland this time, not a message through a third party. They wrote out themselves, Cole and Ella together, and they went to each property in turn and sat at kitchen tables that were not unlike their own, and asked directly, "Has anything happened here that you couldn't fully explain?" Fences down. Cattle gone overnight. Survey questions you didn't pursue. Offers made at moments that seemed too convenient. At the first property, Jim and Clara Seavey looked at each other, and Clara said quietly, "Our south fence line. 3 years ago. We thought it was a bull." At the second, an older rancher named Douglas Pratt said nothing for a long time, and then said, "I sold the East 40 to Cross in 1879. I sold it because I was afraid of losing all of it. I've wondered about that decision every day since." At the third property, it was Bill Marston who finally said the thing nobody had said out loud yet. "He ran my brother off a piece of land in '81, Marston said. "My brother could never prove it. Just things kept going wrong. A water source dried up that had no business drying up. 2 of his horses got sick in the same week. He sold and left the territory." Marston looked at Cole, then at Ella. "I always thought if enough of us had stood together, then my brother would still be here." Cole looked at Marston steadily. "Will you stand together now?" Marston was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has a decision in it. "Yes," he said. They rode home with 5 signed statements and the particular feeling of something that had been scattered starting to consolidate. The Territorial Marshal's office responded in 9 days. Marshal Thomas Reeves was a spare man in his late 40s who arrived on a gray horse and introduced himself with handshake and no elaboration, and sat at Ella's kitchen table with the written statements and the survey documentation and the account of the cut fence, and read through everything with the focused stillness of someone who had learned to hear what documents were really saying. When he finished, he looked at Ella. "How long have you been collecting this?" he said. "Some of it was collected before I knew I was collecting it," she said honestly. "The survey documents were research. The neighbor statements were about solidarity. The fence incident was the thing that made me think I needed someone with federal authority." Reeves nodded. He looked at Cole. "You were there the night of the fence?" "Yes." "You've worked range country?" 20 years? Then you know the difference between a fence that goes down and a fence that's cut." "I do," Cole said. This was cut. Reeves looked back at his documents. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett. I can't promise you anything out of this. Cross is well connected, and he's careful. He doesn't do things himself. Whatever happened to that fence, the man who cut it isn't going to be named Nathaniel Cross." He paused. "But what you've brought me here, along with what my office has received from 3 other properties in this county over the past 5 years that were never connected until now, this is enough to open a formal inquiry." Ella felt Cole go still beside her. "3 other properties," she said. 2 sold to Cross within a year of filing complaints that went nowhere. 1 burned. Reeves said it simply the way men who deal in facts say the hard ones. "We never connected them because they were isolated incidents across different jurisdictions. Your case is the first time someone has pushed back hard enough publicly enough and documented it thoroughly enough that the pattern becomes visible." The kitchen was very quiet. "What happens during an inquiry?" Cole said. "Cross's financial records, his property acquisition history, any contracts or correspondence related to Eagle Creek Ranch or the properties I mentioned." Reeves folded the documents back into his satchel. "It will take time, possibly months. And during that time, Cross will know something is happening, and he may push harder on your situation before the inquiry constrains him." He looked at Ella directly. "I want you to be prepared for that." "I've been prepared for that since the first time he rode up to my gate," she said. Reeves almost smiled. "I believe you," he said. "One more thing." He looked at both of them. "Don't do anything in that gap that gives him ammunition. No confrontations. No public accusations. You've done the right things in the right order. Keep doing that." He left. Ella and Cole sat at the kitchen table after the sound of his horse faded, and the room felt different than it had before he arrived. Fuller somehow and more dangerous at the same time. "He said months," Cole said. I heard him. That's a long time for Cross to keep pushing. I know. She had her hands flat on the table. But we have the inquiry. We have the neighbor statements. We have Holt. She looked at Cole. And we have each other. He looked at her when she said it. The specific way he looked at her, sometimes the one she'd gotten better at, not immediately looking away from. Yes, he said. We do. 2 weeks after Marshal Reeves's visit, Ella was at the desk in her father's office. Her office now, she was making herself call it that when she heard a horse at the gate and looked up to find a man she didn't recognize. Not Cross. Not anyone from town. Someone she'd never seen. He was youngish, maybe mid-20s, with the dusty look of someone who had ridden a long way and the careful, watchful expression of someone trying to look like he wasn't watching. He asked for Cole Bennett by name. Ella went to find Cole in the barn. Cole came out to the gate and looked at the man, and something happened in his face that Ella had never seen before. Not recognition exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something old. Danny, Cole said. The young man got off his horse. Cole. He looked at the ranch. At Ella, standing on the porch, back at Cole. I heard you were out here. Took me a while to find you. Cole was very still. Why were you looking? Danny reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. Because someone else was looking too, he said. Man came through Taos asking about you 6 weeks ago. Asking about the Morrison name. Asking about your years in New Mexico. He held out the letter. I wrote down what he looked like and what he asked and who he talked to. Thought you'd want to know. Cole took the letter. Read it. Then he looked up and his eyes found Ella on the porch, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. No stillness, no careful composure. Just a man who had been found by his past and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. She came down off the porch. She walked to the gate and stood beside Cole and looked at Danny. Come in, she said. You've ridden a long way. We'll feed you, and you'll tell us everything. Danny looked at her. At Cole. She's your wife. Yes, Cole said. It came out without hesitation. Not the way it had in Holt's office, the careful legal yes, just yes. Danny nodded once. All right then. Cross's man had been thorough. Danny sat at the kitchen table and described him from the letter, and from memory, middle-aged, well-dressed, asked his questions carefully, and paid for his information in coin, which meant he was professional. He had specifically asked about a man named Morrison, who worked cattle in New Mexico around 1877 through 1881. He had specifically asked whether Morrison had any legal trouble, any debts, any questionable departures. Cole, to his credit, had no legal trouble, no debts, and no questionable departures. Danny confirmed this with the directness of someone who had personal knowledge. You were good in New Mexico, Danny said. You were the best hand I ever worked beside, and I told the man that. I told him Morrison was straight and honest, and the only thing strange about him was that he never talked about where he came from, and he always looked like he was on his way somewhere else. He looked at Cole. The man didn't seem happy to hear there was nothing to find. Cross? Cole said more to himself than to the room. Don't know his name, Danny said. But whoever sent him, they were hoping to find something ugly. After Danny had eaten and been shown to a place to sleep in the bunkhouse, Ella and Cole stood in the kitchen alone, and she said, He found nothing. Nothing usable, Cole said. Then we're all right. He looked at her. For now, she could see what he wasn't saying, that a man like Cross didn't send one investigator and stop. That nothing usable today didn't mean nothing tomorrow. That the inquiry Reeves had opened was protection, but not a wall. Cole? She said his name the way she'd learned to the way that meant stop carrying it alone for a minute. We've been 3 steps ahead of him every time. We will be again. He looked at her steadily. I don't want this to keep coming at you because of me, he said. The Morrison thing, my history, is your history, she said. Not a weapon. Cross is trying to make it a weapon, but he failed. She held his gaze. Stop apologizing for things you haven't done. Something shifted in his face. I'm not apologizing. You're carrying it, she said. Same thing, different posture. He was quiet for a long time. How do you do that? He said. Do what? See the thing I'm actually doing. He said it without any performance in it, without any deflection, just a genuine question. She thought about it honestly. Because I do the same thing, she said. I just usually know I'm doing it. He looked at her, and this time neither of them looked away, and the kitchen was very quiet, and outside Eagle Creek Ranch held the last of the summer evening in its fields and fences, and the mountains rising behind it all. I'm not leaving, Cole said. She blinked. I didn't say you were. I know. He held her gaze. I'm saying it anyway. She had learned over the weeks not to deflect everything that moved her, so she let that land, let it settle, let herself feel what it was, which was substantial. Good, she said, quietly. He nodded once, looked at the window. She looked at the ledger on the table. And they stood in the same room, breathing the same air, and neither of them said anything else about it, and neither of them needed to. The inquiry moved. Not quickly. Nothing federal moved quickly, but it moved with the particular steady progress of an institution that had decided something was worth investigating. Marshal Reeves came back twice in the following weeks, both times asking for additional documents, both times saying nothing about where things stood in the way of federal officers, who never say where things stand until they're ready to say something definitive. Cross went quiet, not the quiet of a man who had given up. Ella knew the difference now. It was the quiet of a man who was watching, waiting, recalculating. She felt it every time she went into Cutter's Creek. The slight shift in how people looked at her. Some warmer, some more guarded the community, sorting itself the way communities do when two powerful forces have been pulling at it and the outcome isn't clear. Marston had started talking. She heard his name from Pete, from Margaret Sutter, from the Seavies. He was telling the story quietly, carefully, the way a man does when he finally decides the truth matters more than the peace of keeping it to himself. About his brother. About the East 40. About 15 years of watching and being afraid. The town was listening. It was a Tuesday morning in the 8th week after the inquiry opened, when Garrison Holt rode out to Eagle Creek Ranch unannounced, which he had never done before. He had always sent word first. Ella saw him coming from the kitchen window and called for Cole, and was on the porch before Holt had fully dismounted. He had a paper in his hand. The inquiry found something, he said. She gripped the porch railing. What? Cross's property acquisition records. Holt came up the steps, handed her the paper. He purchased 4 properties in this county in the last 12 years. In 3 of those cases, there's evidence of financial pressure applied through a third party, specifically a lending agent who worked with 2 of the county's smaller banks. He looked at Cole, who had come around from the barn. The same agent who handled your original loan with Horace Bellamy's bank, Ella. The porch was very quiet. He was working with the bank, Cole said. Not a question. The marshal's office believes Bellamy was not directly involved. He may simply have applied policies without knowing the source of the pressure. But the lending agent, a man named Cowell, has been cooperating with the inquiry since Tuesday. Holt's voice was precise and careful. He named Cross directly, in exchange for a reduced penalty on his own conduct. Ella read the paper in her hands, read it twice. This is enough, she said. For the criminal inquiry, yes, Holt said. For your civil situation, the loan, the property, your standing in this county? Yes. Cross's ability to threaten you through the banking process is finished. Bellamy's bank has already been contacted by the marshal's office, and they are fully cooperating. She lowered the paper. Cole was looking at her. It's over, she said. She said it to Holt, but she was looking at Cole. The threat from Cross is over, Holt said. He'll fight the inquiry as long as he can, but what Cowell has given the marshal's office is enough. And with Marston and the other ranchers prepared to testify about the pattern, he paused. Cross knows it. I have it from a reliable source that he's already consulting a lawyer about options that don't involve this county. Ella stood on the porch with the paper in her hands and the summer air around her, and the mountains and the ranch, and the repaired fence, and the 14 cattle in the eastern pasture that was hers had always been hers, 40 years of Whitmore work pressed into this earth. She didn't cry. She had not cried once through all of it. But her hands were shaking, and this time she didn't press them flat to make them stop. She let them shake. For just a moment she let them. Cole came up the porch steps. He stood beside her. His hand found hers. Not a romantic gesture, not a performance, just a hand next to a shaking one that closed around it and held. She let him. That evening, after Holt had gone and the day's work was done, Ella sat on the porch steps, the way she'd sat that first day after Cross's false boundary claim, and Cole came out and sat beside her in the same configuration as then, and the summer evening did what summer evenings in Colorado do, stretched long and gold and unhurried toward dark. "I owe you something," she said. Cole looked at her. "When I asked you to marry me," she said carefully, "I told you both parties could dissolve the arrangement with 60 days' notice once the loan was secured and in good standing." She kept looking at the mountains. "The loan is secured. The threat is resolved. You'd be within your rights to—" "Ella, I'm trying to say something." "I know." His voice was quiet. "Let me say something first." She stopped. "I came to this ranch 6 weeks ago looking for work," he said. "I was passing through. That was the plan. That's been the plan every time for 12 years. He looked at his hands. The plan was to keep moving before anything could matter enough to hurt. He paused. That plan stopped working somewhere around the time you spread your father's survey documents on this table and stayed up past midnight trying to prove a liar wrong. She turned to look at him. "I don't want the 60-day provision," he said. "I never wanted it. I agreed to it because it was fair, and it was what you needed to feel safe saying yes." He looked at her directly. "But I'm telling you now that what I want is to stay. Not because the ranch needs work. Not because there's nowhere better to be. Because this is because you are—" He stopped. Started again. "Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks I stopped being a man passing through and started being a man who lives here. And I would like to keep living here, if that's something you want." The evening was entirely still. "I want that," she said. Her voice was low and plain and completely honest. "I want that very much." He looked at her for a long moment, with that most unguarded expression, the one she'd first seen at the gate, when Danny arrived, the one she'd learned to recognize as the real Cole Bennett, underneath the 20 years of careful composure. "All right then," he said. "All right," she said. And they sat on the porch steps of Eagle Creek Ranch as the Colorado summer evening turned amber, and the mountains caught the last light and held it, and neither of them moved to go inside, and there was no more need to explain anything, because some things settle into place, not with declarations or grand gestures, but with two people sitting in the same place at the same time, and both of them knowing without saying it again that they are exactly where they mean to be. The morning after they sat on the porch steps and said what they said, Ella woke up before dawn and lay in the dark and felt the unfamiliar weight of something good sitting in her chest. She wasn't used to it. That was the honest truth. She was used to weight that was worry weight, that was grief weight, that was the specific pressure of a problem that needed solving before it solved her. This was different. This was the weight of something she wanted to protect. And protecting things you wanted was a different kind of work than fighting things you feared. And she hadn't realized until that moment how long it had been since she'd had anything in that first category. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window. Cole was already in the barn. She drank her coffee and watched the barn and didn't pretend she was doing anything else. When he came in to wash up for breakfast, she said without turning from the stove, "I want to take the loan documentation to Holt today. Have him review the current standing officially. Make sure everything is clean." Good idea, Cole said. And I want to write to the 3 properties Reeves mentioned, the ones who sold to Cross. They may not know the inquiry happened. They deserve to know. Cole dried his hands. That's a good thing to do. And... She stopped. He looked at her. And I want to look at the north pasture for expansion, she said. If we're planning to stay. She stopped again on the word, which was new in her mouth in this context. If we're building this for real, the herd needs to grow. The northern section could carry another 20 head if we improve the water access. Cole leaned against the counter and looked at her with that expression she'd learned, the one that meant he was hearing the thing underneath the thing she was saying. We're planning to stay, he said, simply. She looked at him. Yes, she said. We are. He nodded once, picked up his coffee cup, and sat at the table, and she turned back to the stove and made breakfast. And the ordinary morning moved around them, the way ordinary mornings do, full of small things, tools and tasks, and the comfortable machinery of a shared life, and neither of them made anything larger than it was, because neither of them needed to. Holt reviewed the loan documentation that afternoon and declared it entirely clean, which was the legal equivalent of him saying, "I told you so," delivered with his characteristic ink-stained restraint. He had already received a formal communication from the bank confirming that the terms of the renegotiated loan stood, and that no further challenges to its validity were anticipated. Bellamy's signature was on that communication too, and it was the signature of a man who understood which way things had gone and was making the best peace he could with the outcome. Cross's lawyers contacted my office this morning, Holt added when they were almost out the door. Ella turned back. About what? A settlement. Holt sat back. He's not admitting liability. He won't. But he is offering to formally withdraw all prior claims against Eagle Creek Ranch property and boundaries in writing registered with the county office in exchange for your agreement not to testify in the federal inquiry. The room went still. Cole said nothing. He was watching her. She looked at Holt. What does Reeves think of that? I spoke with him before you arrived, Holt said. The inquiry has enough without your testimony. Cowell's statement alone is sufficient. What you and your neighbors provide is amplification, context. He paused carefully. If you take the settlement, Cross gets a quieter inquiry. He still faces serious legal consequences, but the public record is thinner. And if I don't take it, the inquiry proceeds fully. Your testimony, the rancher's testimony, all of it on record. Holt met her eyes. The settlement protects you. Refusing it also protects you in a different way. Both are legitimate choices. Ella stood in the middle of Holt's office and thought about Douglas Pratt saying, I sold the East 40 to Cross in 1879. I've wondered about that decision every day since. She thought about Bill Marston, saying if enough of us had stood together, then my brother would still be here. She thought about the 2 properties that had sold and the one that burned. She thought about a woman 6 weeks from now somewhere else in this territory, standing at her kitchen table with bank papers in front of her, and a man like Cross at her gate, and no public record to tell her what he was. No, she said. Holt looked at her. No settlement, she said. Tell his lawyers the answer is no. She heard Cole exhale beside her, not with relief, not with surprise. With something that sounded like recognition. Holt wrote something on his notepad. All right, he said. And the way he said it, she thought maybe that was the answer he'd expected. So, they rode home through the golden Colorado afternoon, and Cole said, You didn't tell me you were going to refuse. I didn't know until I said it, she said honestly. He looked at her sidelong. You all right with it? I will be. She settled her hat. I keep thinking about the people who couldn't stand up when it happened to them. Because they were alone, or because they were afraid, or because they didn't have documentation, or a lawyer, or a federal inquiry already open. She looked ahead. If I have all of those things, and I still choose quiet, what does that say? Cole was quiet for a moment. It says, you're human, he said. It's still a real choice. I know it's a real choice. I made it. She looked at him. I just need to stay sure of it. You'll stay sure of it, he said. How do you know? Because I've never once seen you unsure of something you believed in, he said. Only things you weren't sure were worth believing. She absorbed that for a moment. That's very specific. You're a very specific person. Something she was choosing to call the wind made her eyes sting briefly. Stop being perceptive, she said. It's disorienting. He almost smiled. She'd gotten very good at seeing when he was almost smiling. It was its own small victory every time. She wrote to the 3 properties that week. 2 letters came back within 10 days. The first was brief, a man named Carver, who'd sold in 1883, who hadn't known about the inquiry, who said in the tight, constrained writing of someone who had been holding something a long time I always suspected. I never thought anyone would listen. The second was longer, from a widow named Frances Aldgate, who had sold in 1880, who wrote 3 pages in careful script about the months before the sale. The things that went wrong. The bank pressure, the isolation, the feeling of fighting something she couldn't see clearly. Ella sat with Frances Aldgate's letter for a long time. She wrote back to both of them. She told them about Reeves, about the inquiry, about what Cowell had said. She told them the truth in plain language, and she told them they were not alone, which was the most important thing either letter needed to contain. She gave both letters to the post rider on a Tuesday and stood at the gate and watched him ride away, and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who has done something small that is also somehow not small at all. Cole came up beside her. The letters, both of them, she said. He stood with her at the gate for a moment. You're building something, he said. What do you mean, ew? I mean, he thought about how to say it. You solved the ranch, the loan, the boundary, the inquiry. Those are finished or finishing. But you keep building. He looked at her. The North Pasture Plan. The letters to Cross's other victims, talking to the ranchers. He paused. You're not just protecting what you have, you're building what comes next. She looked at him. Isn't that what people do? Not always. His voice was quiet. Some people, after everything that's happened to them, they just protect what they saved. They don't reach anymore. He held her gaze. You reach. She didn't know what to do with that, so she did what she always did with things that moved her more than she expected. She filed it somewhere careful and looked away. Come look at the North Pasture with me, she said. I want to show you what I'm thinking for the water access. He fell into step beside her. The formal hearing of the federal inquiry was set for the second Tuesday of October, which gave them 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Eagle Creek Ranch moved at the kind of productive pace that comes when people who have been managing a crisis finally have the crisis contained enough to put their full attention on the work itself. Cole started on the North Pasture Water Access Project, digging extending pipe, the kind of physical labor that he seemed to find genuinely settling and that Ella had stopped feeling guilty about watching him do. She worked the books. She ordered 2 additional breeding mares from a seller in Denver that her father had used, the transaction conducted by letter over 2 weeks, the prices negotiated down by $30, through the specific persistence of a woman who had been keeping her own books for 6 years and knew exactly what fair market value looked like. When the confirmation letter arrived, she showed it to Cole at the kitchen table. He read the price, looked at her. You knocked him down $30. 32, she said, and he's covering the transport cost. Cole looked at the letter, then at her with the expression that was by now entirely familiar respect, plain and direct, the kind that had no conditions. All right, he said. You're something. She took the letter back. I know, she said, and didn't say it with vanity, but with the steady plainness of a woman who had always known her own worth and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. He laughed. A real one. She hadn't heard him laugh that freely before, and it hit her the way new sounds do when you realize you've been waiting for them without knowing. She filed that away carefully, too. Bill Marston came to the ranch on a Thursday morning with his hat in his hands and something on his face that she didn't recognize from their previous meetings. He sat at the kitchen table and he said without preamble, "I need to tell you something that I should have told you earlier." Ella set her coffee down. Cole was at the table too, and he went still in the way he did when something required full attention. "Cross came to see me," Marston said. 4 days ago. Ella felt cold. "What did he want?" "He offered me money." Marston turned his hat in his hands. "A significant amount. To withdraw my statement from the inquiry. To say I'd been confused about the details, that my brother's situation was more complicated than I'd made it sound." He looked up at her. "He knew I was testifying. He knew everything I'd said." "How?" Cole said. Marston pressed his lips together. "There's someone in Holt's office," he said. "I don't know who, but Cross knew things that only came from what I told Holt directly." The room was very quiet. Ella looked at Cole. Cole looked at her. "What did you tell Cross?" Ella said. "I told him no." Marston said it flat and direct, and she could see the cost of what came next. "But he didn't just offer me money. He told me he said that if I testified, he would make sure my North Pasture water access got tied up in a dispute that would take 5 years to resolve." He paused. And then he said something else. Marston looked at Cole. He said he knew who Cole Morrison was, and he had documentation that would raise serious questions about your husband's history that would be very damaging to bring into a federal hearing. The cold deepened. Cole leaned forward. His voice was very level. "What documentation?" He wouldn't say specifically. Marston looked at him. "I don't know if he has anything real or if he's bluffing, but I thought you needed to know, both of you, before Tuesday." He stood, put his hat on. "And I want you to know I'm still testifying. I told you I would, and I meant it." He looked at Ella directly. "He didn't count on the fact that I've been afraid for 15 years, and that being afraid gets very heavy after a while." After he left the kitchen, held a specific kind of silence that meant both of them were thinking fast, and neither of them were ready to say what they were thinking yet. Cole spoke first. "The Morrison accusation is a bluff." "You don't know that." "What does he have?" "A working man who used his mother's name for 4 years after a personal loss. No criminal record. No debts. No false claims." Cole was steady, but she could hear the tension underneath. "He can make it sound like something in a room. He can't make it into something in a federal document." "It doesn't have to be true," Ella said. "It just has to create enough doubt that the hearing gets complicated." She stood and went to the window, not to look at anything specific, just to move. "And someone in Holt's office." "We need to tell Holt," Cole said. "How if someone in his office is talking to Cross?" "Tell Holt directly, in person. Today." Cole stood. "Holt has been straight with us every time. If there's a leak in his office, he doesn't know about it. He needs to know." She turned. He was right. He was usually right about the direct move when she was calculating the angled one, and their combination had served them well enough that she'd learned to trust it. "Saddle the horses," she said. They were in Holt's office within 2 hours. Holt listened to what Marston had told them with the ink-stained, focused stillness that meant he was processing and building simultaneously. When they finished, he set his pen down. "Someone in my office," he said. Not angry, not surprised particularly. The tone of a man accepting a fact that rearranged several things at once. "That's what it sounds like," Cole said. Holt was quiet for a moment. "I have 2 clerks. One's been with me 8 years. One started 3 months ago." He looked at his desk. 3 months ago is approximately when Cross would have started looking for leverage in this case. He stood. "I'm going to need you to wait outside for a few minutes." They waited in the hall. They heard voices from inside Holt's office, his controlled and precise, and another voice, younger, increasingly distressed. It lasted about 12 minutes. Then a door inside opened and closed. Then Holt came out. "My newer clerk," he said simply. "He'll be providing a statement to Marshal Reeves by end of day." He looked at Cole. "And I can assure you that anything Cross claims to have about your husband's history has been communicated to me directly, and I will personally address it with the Federal Examiner before Tuesday." Cole looked at him. "What did Cross tell him about me?" Holt met his eyes. That Cole Morrison of New Mexico was a man who abandoned a dying wife. The hall went absolutely still. Ella turned and looked at Cole. His face was the most still she had ever seen it. Not the controlled stillness she'd learned over weeks. Something underneath that older, the stillness of a man who has been hit in a place that doesn't armor over no matter how long you leave it. "He abandoned no one," Ella said. Her voice came out very quiet and completely certain. She was looking at Holt, but she said it for Cole. "His wife died in a structural collapse while he was working. That is what happened. If Cross has a document that says otherwise, it is a fabrication." Holt looked at her, then at Cole. "I'll need you to give me a formal statement to that effect," he said to Cole. "With names, dates, the location where it happened." Cole's jaw moved. "I can do that," he said. "Today if possible." "Today," Cole said. They stayed in Holt's office for 2 more hours that afternoon. Cole gave his statement, names, dates, the mountain property in Colorado, the storm, the structural failure, the neighbors who had been there in the aftermath and could still be contacted. His voice was level through all of it. His hands were still. Only Ella, sitting beside him, and knowing by now the particular language his body used, knew what it cost him. When it was done, and Holt was writing and not looking at them, she reached over and put her hand over his on the table. Just for a moment. Just to say, "I'm here. I know it's done now." He turned his hand over and held hers, and then let go. She let him have that. She didn't make anything of it in the room. They rode home in the early dark, and for the first part of the ride, she let him have the silence he needed. And then when she judged he'd had enough of it, she said, "He made it ugly because it was the most painful thing he had." Cole's voice was rough at the edges, in a way it almost never was. It worked for about 30 seconds. "I know." She looked ahead. "It didn't work after that." "Because you spoke before I could. Because it was true and needed saying," she said simply. "You don't carry things you don't deserve to carry, Cole. I decided that weeks ago. I just hadn't found the occasion to say it." He was quiet for a long time. "Ella," he said finally. "Don't," she said, because she knew the shape of what was coming, and she wasn't ready for him to thank her. Gratitude from him would undo her faster than anything else had managed to. And she had a federal hearing in 5 days, and she needed to stay in one piece until then. He understood. She knew he understood, because he said nothing else, and the silence between them shifted from heavy to something warmer, and they rode home through the dark to Eagle Creek Ranch together. The federal hearing took place on a Tuesday, in a room that was considerably more formal than Agnes Calloway's commission meeting, with a federal examiner named Whitfield, who wore a dark coat and asked questions with the careful precision of someone who intended to use every answer. Cross was there. He sat across the room with 3 lawyers and the particular rigid composure of a man who had run out of moves and was now in the business of controlling the damage. He did not look at Ella. He did not look at Cole. Ella testified for 40 minutes. She had prepared meticulously, not because she needed prompts, but because she was Ella Whitmore Bennett and preparation was what she did, and she was not going to face a federal examiner without every document, every date, every name at her fingertips. She was clear and factual, and absolutely without performance. She said what happened. She showed what she had. She answered every question Whitfield asked and did not offer more than was asked because Holt had told her not to, and because she'd learned by now that the truth delivered plainly was more powerful than the truth delivered dramatically. When Cross's lead lawyer cross-examined her and suggested that the complaint against his client was motivated by personal animosity arising from rejected business offers, she looked at the lawyer steadily and said, My personal feelings about Mr. Cross are not in evidence. The county survey is. The federal lending agent's statement is. The statements of 5 neighboring property owners are. You're welcome to address those instead." Whitfield almost smiled. Cole testified after her. He was shorter. 20 minutes precise, the Morrison history laid out clearly and without apology, because Holt had told him, and he was right, that preempting Cross's narrative was better than waiting for it. Marston testified last. He stood up and looked at the room and said everything he'd said at Ella's kitchen table, and more in the plain, unflinching voice of a man who had been afraid for 15 years and had gotten past being afraid of this specific thing at least. When Marston described what happened to his brother, the room was very quiet. Cross's lawyers objected twice. Whitfield overruled both times with the particular efficiency of a federal examiner who knows what is and is not relevant to his inquiry. It was over by 4 in the afternoon. Whitfield gave no immediate ruling he never did. Holt had explained it would be weeks before the formal determination, but when he stood and gathered his documents, he looked at the room in a way that said enough without saying anything. Ella walked out of that courthouse into the late afternoon and stood on the steps and breathed. Cole came out beside her. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like something heavy just got set down," she said. "And I've been carrying it so long that I'm not sure yet how to walk without it." "You'll figure it out," he said. "I know I will." She looked at him. "We will." He looked back at her, and the thing she'd been filing away carefully for weeks, the almost smiles, the hand over hers on the table. The "I'm not leaving" said plain and direct in the kitchen. All of it was right there on his face, not hidden, not composed away, just present. "Let's go home," he said. She said, "Yes, let's." 3 weeks after the hearing, Whitfield's determination arrived by federal post. Ella read it at the kitchen table, standing up because she'd gotten the letter from the post rider and come straight inside, and hadn't sat down yet, and didn't think about sitting down until she was halfway through the 3rd paragraph. She sat down. She read the rest. Nathaniel Cross was found to have engaged in a pattern of fraudulent property acquisition activity across 4 counties over 14 years, utilizing third-party financial agents to manufacture bank pressure, misrepresenting survey documentation, and engaging in deliberate property damage through agents acting on his behalf. The determination recommended criminal referral to the territorial court and civil action for damages by affected parties. Eagle Creek Ranch was named explicitly. Its property boundaries, including the eastern pasture, were confirmed as registered in the original 1846 deed and the 1872 county survey. No further challenges to those boundaries would be recognized by the Federal Land Office. The loan held by Eagle Creek Ranch was declared free of any fraudulent interference, and its terms confirmed as legally binding and valid. Cole came in from the barn 20 minutes later, washed his hands, saw her face, and stopped. She turned the determination around on the table. He crossed to the table and read it. He stood there for a long time. Then he looked up. She looked at him. "It's done," she said. He nodded once. "It's done," he said. The North Pasture water access was finished by the end of that month. The 2 breeding mares arrived from Denver on a Thursday morning, stepping off the transport with the irritable dignity of horses, who had opinions about long journeys, and Ella walked each one around the yard herself, while Cole watched from the barn door, with his arms folded, and the expression she'd stopped trying to describe, because it would have required words she wasn't ready to use yet. She put the mares in the east barn and gave them time to settle, and stood in the doorway after looking at the ranch, the way you look at something you had to fight to keep. Cole came and stood beside her. "We need to talk about hiring on a permanent hand," she said. "The North Pasture expansion is going to mean more work than 2 people can cover when winter prep starts." "I've been thinking about that too," he said. "Danny mentioned he was between work." She looked at him. "The man who rode from New Mexico to warn you. That's him." "Hire him," she said. "If you trust him, I trust him." Cole turned to look at her. "You trust my judgment." "I trust your judgment," she confirmed. I decided that somewhere around the time you read my father's survey documents at this table and caught the thing I'd almost missed." She looked back at the barn. "Don't make a thing of it." "I won't," he said. And she could hear the almost smile in his voice without looking. The day Ella opened the old ranch ledger and began the new entry, it was the first morning of November, and the year was almost done. She sat at the desk, in what she now called her office, without hesitation, with the lamp burning, and the ledger open, and she wrote the date and the current figures at the top of the page. 14 head of cattle up to 22, counting the new animals. 2 breeding mares. The north pasture operational. The loan current. Monthly payment made on time for the 3rd consecutive month. She turned back to the beginning of the ledger. Found the page from the spring, before her father died, the numbers that had started this whole impossible chain of things. She looked at what the ranch had been. Then she looked at what it was now. She closed the old ledger and opened a new one. At the top of the first page, she wrote the date, and then, because she was practical and precise, and this was a business document, she wrote the formal name of the property, Eagle Creek Ranch, operated by Eleanor and Cole Bennett. She looked at that for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. Cole came in mid-morning boots, on the mat hat off, and poured himself coffee and sat at the table with the quiet ease of someone who had been coming in through that door long enough that the motion was part of him now. He looked at the new ledger open in front of her. "New book," he said. "New year," she said. "New numbers." He looked at the page, read the header. Was quiet for a moment, in the specific way she'd learned to read. "Eleanor and Cole Bennett," he said. "That's our name?" she said simply. "I thought it should be in the record." He set down his coffee cup, looked at her with the entirely unguarded face that she no longer had to file away, because it was simply part of her life now, as regular and essential as the ledger and the morning coffee and the sound of the mountains. "I want to ask you something," he said. She set her pen down. "Ask it. Not about the ranch." He looked at his hands for a moment, then looked at her. "When I came here, I told you I didn't know how to stay when things were good. That was the truth when I said it." He paused. "I want you to know that it isn't the truth anymore. I know how to stay. I know because I've been staying. Every morning I wake up here is a morning I chose. Not because I have nowhere else to go." His voice was quiet and completely steady. "Because this is where I want to be. You are where I want to be." The office was very still. Ella looked at this man, this mountain cowboy, who had come to her gate looking for work, and instead found whatever this was, whatever they had built inside the bones of a desperate arrangement. And she felt the weight in her chest that she'd woken up with that first morning after the porch steps, the good weight, the weight of something worth protecting, and she understood now what it was. It was this. Him. Here. "Cole," she said. "I have been in love with you since somewhere around the time you went up that slope in the dark to get the last steer back." She said it plain and direct, the way she said everything that mattered. "I didn't say it because I was afraid that the arrangement was all you wanted, and I didn't want to ask you for more than you came here prepared to give." He was looking at her with his whole face. "I came here prepared to work," he said. "I wasn't prepared for you." A pause. "I love you, Ella. I have for a long time. I just didn't know what to do with it." She stood up from the desk. He stood up from the table. And in the space between them, the kitchen table, the ledger, the lamp, the whole ordinary, beautiful architecture of a life they had built from almost nothing. They closed the distance, and he put his arms around her, and she let him, and she put her face against his shoulder and felt his hand move to the back of her head and hold there, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. The winter came to Eagle Creek Ranch, the way winter always came to Colorado, hard and certain and complete. The north pasture held. The herd held. The new mares settled and proved their worth before the first snow fell. Danny Morrison, he used Cole's family name now by choice, which said everything that needed to be said about what Eagle Creek had become. for more than one person, turned out to be exactly the hand Cole had said he was. Steady and capable and discreet in the way of people who have learned that good work speaks for itself. Marston came by in December with news that Cross had accepted a negotiated settlement with the federal territory that ended his ability to hold or acquire property in 3 counties, which was not everything, but it was enough. The 2 properties that had sold to him were being reviewed for restitution. Frances Aldgate wrote to say she had received a communication from the territory that she did not fully understand, but that seemed to be good news, and could Ella explain it? Ella wrote back and explained it in plain language and told her it was good news because it was. On a January morning, when the snow lay thick and still over every corner of the ranch, Ella stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched Cole and Danny come out of the barn into the cold, both of them breathing vapor. Danny saying something that made Cole laugh, the real laugh, the one she'd first heard over the breeding mare, price negotiation, and she felt the full weight of what this was. Not the ranch, not the victory over Cross, or the federal determination, or the clean loan, or the new ledger. Not even the love that had grown between her and Cole so quietly and so completely that she couldn't now identify the exact moment it had taken root. All of those things. And something more. Something her father had tried to tell her in the way he talked about Eagle Creek, in the way he said a ranch wasn't a piece of land, but a living thing. And what made it live wasn't money or legal standing or good soil. It was people. It was the specific people who chose it, who worked it, who got up every morning and made the deliberate choice to be there. She thought about Cole saying, "I know how to stay because I've been staying." She thought about her own mother's name in the old ledger decades back, her grandfather's handwriting, her father's careful notes in the margins, now her handwriting, and Cole's name beside hers. Eagle Creek Ranch had always been a place where people chose to belong. She was simply the next one in the line, and she had found against all reasonable odds in the middle of the most frightened and desperate season of her life, a man who wanted to stand in that line beside her. She set down her coffee cup and went out to meet the morning. Cole saw her coming from the barn and said nothing, just waited, and when she reached him, he fell into step beside her, the way he always did now. Natural, unhurried, exactly where he meant to be, and they walked together into the day that lay in front of them. Into the work, and the cold, and the life they had built from a courthouse Tuesday, and a handful of desperate choices, and the slow ordinary, extraordinary accumulation of 2 people who had each been alone long enough to know what it meant to finally completely, and without reservation, come home. Eagle Creek Ranch stood through that winter and every winter after, and it held everything worth holding: the land, the work, the love, and the simple, unshakable truth that some places become yours, not because you were born to them, but because you were brave enough, when everything was on the line, to choose them. And they chose it. Every single day they chose